Hi everyone, Brian here, wishing you a wonderful Monday and a great week ahead. We're continuing to look at the Bible as a resource for understanding the reality and the experience of the human soul. It's my observation that in the modern era, however one wants to define that, the era that began at some point in the 15th century, probably came to an end at some point in the 20th century, that 500 years of modernity. A lot happened, but it can be, I think, put under the umbrella, at least, of understanding it as humanism. Incredible things, I think, occurred for a lot of people as we came to understand this humanistic orientation to life. At the core of humanism was a profound trust that a disciplined human mind could look at the world objectively, look at each other objectively, and ultimately even look at our interior selves objectively, and find some truths that had evaded human beings who didn't have that capacity to actually look at the world around them, the people they were sharing that world with, and their own individuality with that profound sense of distance, careful, rational distancing. Eventually we created the scientific method out of that concept, and both science, technology, and various philosophical forms followed suit. In the midst of that, we've seen, I think, in the last 150 years, an incredible emphasis on understanding Jesus as he's presented to us in the New Testament of the Bible, primarily out of his humanity. Who was Jesus, the human being? And that's a really good corrective to perhaps the medieval kind of sometimes magical thinking that many individuals had of Jesus the God incarnate, with emphasis on God, barely incarnate, that Jesus just sort of shone through the physicality of his life. Until we get to, the late 20th and early 21st centuries, when the rational world, the humanistic world, is really only interested in Jesus as that human being that humanism can talk about. Interestingly enough, the book club at Church of Our Savior, for its October book, will be reading Rabbi Jesus, which is yet another book of many that have been published over the last 20, 30, even 40 years, even beginning with Albert Schweitzer, who wanted to, search for the historical Jesus. It's yet another book that takes a very good look at Jesus, in this case as an emerging Jewish rabbi. I want to give incredible credit to the modern humanist movement. We're all in favor of it. We've all benefited from the philosophical, scientific, and technological revolutions that have occurred over the last several hundred years. Economists tell us that much higher percentage of the world population lives without economic insecurity as it had in previous centuries and millennia of human experience on this planet. So there's that. That life is healthier, more balanced, more full of opportunity, etc., etc. And we know the dark side, the shadowy side of all that, the accumulation of industrial waste, especially now the wastes that have gone into the atmosphere, and the climate change that may come as a result of that, are almost avaricial approach to accumulating more and more and more energy from the resources of the planet we're in, which have had their own consequences in terms of not only providing, say, an electrified planet where people have access to all of the benefits of electronics and electricity, but also the other subatomic realities that have been uncovered at the same time that give us the opportunity for chemical or nuclear weaponry and the shadow that leaves on top of what we're experiencing as human beings. So it seems to me that most people today are comfortable looking at Jesus as a human teacher who lived a human life and who inaugurated a new religious movement, first within Judaism, and then one that quickly spread beyond Judaism into the Gentile world around it. We're more aware of how that happened within the Roman Empire, but it happened in Ethiopia and the Persian Empire, in India. It happened, all over the place. But we're much more aware of the relationship between the emergent Christianity and how that impacted the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, again, I want to say that that's extremely valuable. It's not good to get lost in this sense that Jesus is just God in a body walking around doing godly things that other people couldn't do. So this is a really good corrective. But it brings us right back to the challenge that I think exists in the scriptural heritage for understanding the relationship between soulfulness and the cognitive, busy, everyday self that's in our minds. We have these two dimensions to us, and we all know it. We all know that we have this very busy, everyday mind working away. And we know we have a deep interior self that's sometimes very private to us. That deep interior self tells us about what it is we truly appreciate in life, or what truly frightens us in life, or when we feel most at ease with ourselves and the people around us, what we find awesome, beautiful, what we feel has been a boon or a blessing in our life, what we experience as a curse or hurt in our life. But like everything else in the modern world, we've been taught much, much more about how to train, manage, and discipline the everyday self for accomplishing all of the human aspects of life, to the point where we've kind of associated the everyday self with what it means to be human. And this deeper self, which understands and intuits the world in these non-concrete, more abstract ways, is, it adds buoyancy and zest to life. Maybe it maybe makes us more interested in life around us, etc. But it's not the important thing. The important thing is the everyday self that can interact as a concrete reality in the concrete world that's shared with concrete other people in concrete social systems, both local, national, and also international. And that these other ones are almost dismissed as sentimental quaintness or light-hearted things that one can enjoy on vacations. And in a lot of modern academic work, it's sort of thought of as, these sort of bizarre creations in evolution that have been created in the human psyche simply as a way to keep us in community with each other, since that's our primary evolutionary source of survival as a species. It's our hypothesis here, however, that the deep self is as in touch with reality as the everyday self. That the rhythm of the universe is such that we are touching and feeling a rhythm that exists alongside all of the physical realities of the expanding universe that our solar system is part of, and the evolving natural globe that we happen to live in. So our hypothesis is that things like beauty and truth, joy, compassion, justice are not simply abstract concepts that the frontal lobes of our brain created to keep us together in ever more sophisticated ways in the complex societies that we formed. But they are ways in which our whole selfhood as a human being can be in touch, yes, with the everyday concrete world, but with the deep rhythmic world of spirit that is moving through it at the same time. We don't want to fall into the trap of simply saying, it's all about God and nothing about our concrete experience. That was sort of the revolution that took place at the Renaissance, and as modernity has stretched around the world from that Italian peninsula that it began on, it's continued to spread around the world and encourage people to trust in the capacity of the everyday mind to learn, to be disciplined, and to accomplish great things. But we don't want the pendulum just to swing completely back to the other side and say there is no mysticism, there is no spirituality, there is no divine spirit at work in the world. These are all just fantasies created by us. So it is the difficult thing, and it has been the difficult thing since the New Testament was written, to present Jesus to the world as both fully human and fully divine at exactly the same time. The one does not overwhelm the other, and the other is never subordinated to the first. It is this union of heaven and earth that I think Moses experienced at the bush on top of Mount Sinai that was fully inflamed, but not at all being burnt up. It's that kind of impossible paradox at which we take our shoes off and realize we're standing on holy ground. I think that was the experience that his disciples had of Jesus, was that he lived this life of absolute full humanity. He loved fancy dinners in the homes of wealthy disciples. He loved being out in nature. He loved forming friendships. He loved to talk politics. Remember referring to Herod as tell that fox. He was as fully engaged with all of the everyday stuff that our modern humanist point of view has pointed to, including the book Rabbi Jesus, when we can see that he engaged in Jewish life and in a great many ways took on the role of roving Jewish rabbi, preaching Torah, preaching the prophets right in the midst of the truth for many Jews living in the first century under Roman rule. And yet, at the exact same time, his disciples had this, I think, experience of him as always united, even in his full humanity, united with the rhythm of the divine at work in the world. And that's that union that I think we find hard to hold on to. Almost all of us who want Jesus to be human and divine still want him to be, say, 51% divine and 49% human, or perhaps more in a contemporary way, 51% human and 49% divine. We can understand, embrace, relate as postmodern humanists to Jesus as a teacher, Jesus as a rabbi, Jesus as a leader, Jesus as a human being. And we find it harder, I think, to relate to Jesus as in some way embodying the fullness of divinity himself. And that's always been the challenge, always been the challenge. It's rife in the New Testament, as I hope we will see. And it's certainly rife in the debates that Christians had over the first few centuries after the New Testament was written and eventually codified. To hold it together, that Jesus is like this, fully human and fully divine. Now, why is that important? It's not because we're putting Jesus over there, but again, the New Testament was written around the presence of Jesus to indicate that in Christ, we too experience this union of heaven and earth. So the point of talking about Jesus in this way, yes, it's to explain Jesus and who he was and what he was like and what he did and the importance of what he did. But one of the most central things about the importance of what he did is that he presented to the people around him, and the authors of the New Testament wanted to present to those of us who read that New Testament centuries later, the reality that this union of heaven and earth is happening right here in me, in you, in everyone around us. And that the proclamation of good news happens right here. The gospel of Jesus Christ is happening right here. While we engage our everyday self with as much lust and love for the world around us as did that couple getting married in Cana, that we are also alive to the importance of the rhythm of the divine in our lives. And the church, unfortunately, has taught us about how those fight with each other. Not that that's not true. They do sort of, they don't trust each other all the time, or at least the everyday voice doesn't feel always comfortable with the deep voice. That seems to be the human condition. And the church is always talking about how these two, of course, we externalize them, heaven and hell, right and wrong, in and out of the church, blessed or cursed by God, etc., etc. But Jesus is all about how these two are actually in sync with each other, working with each other, creating full humanity within us. And I hope we can uncover that over the next couple of months as we look at Jesus and the New Testament through those lenses that the authors of the New Testament, whether they were writing Gospels or letters or even the fascinating revelation of to John, that these are all about experiences that the disciples of Jesus wanted to pass on once they, began to die out and get older, and they really wanted to write it down so that we would have this treasure that tells us, yes, about Jesus and yes, about the early church, but is really telling us about ourselves. Have a great week. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next Monday.